Hey, this is Peter. I'm in New York, and what we're talking about today is your philosophy good enough in your film? Is it something which has come from entirely you, or is it something which you believe that's how you make films, that's how films should be made? Maybe you've had experiences on a film set and then kind of gone into and learnt from those mentors, which maybe aren't your real mentors, and then you've been kind of gone down that track so that when you're on a film set, that's how you treat your actors, that's how you treat your crew, because that's how you believe films are made. Or you could have come from a commercial background, you could have come from maybe like a documentary background, so you treat things that way. My point is that every film has a different philosophy, and it's usually down to the person and what they believe in their own personal life, what their politics are, whether they're more liberal or conservative, whether they're more kind of I guess it's the same thing but free, or kind of stricter on people. So when you get onto a film set, are you someone who likes a coffee house atmosphere where everyone's kind of working to get the job done? Is it like a church where no one's allowed to interrupt anyone? Is it like a military school where everything's like, get this done like a job? Do you treat it like a job? Do you treat it like a bunch of kids having fun, making films? You can probably tell from me which one I prefer, although it might surprise you because I am quite kind of free and laid back and just run around with a camera, but when it comes to actually setting up the tripod, I tend to stay a bit stricter. So and that's my way of kind of trying to enjoy best of both worlds in terms of organising my crew and actors. But when it comes to other productions that I work on, I'm solely kind of, if I'm a GOP, for example, if I work on a production and I'm working with the lights and I'm working with the camera to get the perfect shot, I understand that needs a certain attitude to get the job done. And although maybe when the actors on the project, you've got to kind of chill out and relax with them and get them in the place that they need to be, or at least help the director get them in the place that they need to be a fucking human being. Or when I'm actually working, setting up things, you can't fuck about, and you have to get things set up and done, and you have to move on because you've got to make the day a lot of the time. It doesn't mean I'm not free with the camera. You can run around and have a lot of freedom. This is just my personal philosophy when it comes to my work on other people's films, or my work on camera work, or lighting or sound. But when it comes to the less technical areas of filmmaking, when it comes to directing or working with actors, you've got to kind of have, well, at least I believe that I have to go in and have the attitude of this is all just fun, we're all just kids making this effort together. So the person that you meet as a director isn't always the person who you can tell from their films that's what kind of guy they are. If you were to take Wes Anderson, for example, in his films, you would see that there's a childlike nature, which is, like the man himself. There is a kind of discrepancy between how kind of easygoing and naive sometimes it seems with the man himself, a little bit kind of shyness to about him, a little kind of introversion, whereas his films are very kind of you would say he works with a lot of cast, a lot of crew. He's very kind of brash and bold in his style, and although you can tell that there's a little bit of the sentiment is still there, obviously the production has made him lean on people, it's made him talk to people and connect with people on a deep and personal level with his actors, and it is something that introverts can actually do, which is why you can kind of tell that that's his philosophy, that is brought through with him. The same with Richard Linklater. I mean, this is a guy who, when he was in college, was a massive extrovert, I guess, in terms of the baseball team, and then when it came to post-college watching films, you can just tell from It's Impossible to Learn to Fly by Reading Books and Slacker that he's kind of kept to himself. But with Slacker, you've got a whole lot of cast and crew in there, so a cast specifically. So you're talking about, and he's on camera as an actor himself, so to be in front of the camera, it takes a kind of extrovert attitude, it takes that kind of power and charisma to be able to do that on screen, a little bit of effort. So his philosophy started there, and obviously as he's grown and had different experiences in his life, your philosophy starts to change after a while. The same is true of Tarantino. I mean, when he first started out, there was a lot more kind of French New Wave moving about, and this happens with a lot of first-time directors. They start French New Wave, and then of course with success comes the ability to make films properly, perhaps, which I actually hate, because it isn't really about making films properly, rather than it is about utilizing the advantages that you have now that there's a bit of money, and it's about making films that other people won't necessarily be able to make. You've kind of got a responsibility to uphold cinema once you get to a certain level, and to send the elevator back down, so to speak. So really your philosophy will change, because things like that will happen, because you become less able to just walk around on the streets because of success, whereas in the beginning you can probably run around on the street, setting up videos here, there and everywhere. You have a lot of energy when you're younger, so your philosophy, and just generally in life, you haven't had that many experiences, you haven't lost all your youthful energy yet, so and hopefully you never do, but it means you can run around on the streets, and so you're always learning as well when you're starting out, so you want to learn as much as possible in the shortest time span as possible, which means usually running around with a camera on the street. So your philosophy is probably going to be upheld as well by your favourite films. So when you're younger, you're probably going to watch 3 films a day, or at least you should be doing. That's what I did a couple of years ago, and it honestly changes your entire philosophy, because your favourite films, let's say you have a top 5, your favourite films are built up amongst that. So then you can kind of say, well, I guess I'm a little bit French New Wave, I guess I'm a little bit Italian neo-realist, or Kurosawa kind of idea, the cinema of Hong Kong with Wong Kar-wai kind of idea. Maybe I'm a bit like that, which is also interesting, because Wong Kar-wai came from that kind of French New Wave style, so you can see it in a lot of his films that obviously you're dealing with a modern Hong Kong, or at least in the 90s Hong Kong, where you're experimenting with colour, you're experimenting with shutter speeds, and the kind of fast-paced life of which came about due to MTV videos, and you're combining that with a French New Wave run-and-gun style, because there's no time for permission, perhaps, and it's these kind of core beliefs which make up how your films are going to be seen, and a lot of the time you're making it for people like yourself, because they're going to appreciate the run and gun style, whereas maybe the majority of people want to watch a Hollywood bullshit. I don't know. It usually seems to me that the more kind of authentic and original the style, the better you're going to be received by people, especially your audience. So if you're doing kind of cookie cutter philosophy, like this is how films are supposed to be made, which is the most dangerous phrase. If you're saying this is how films are supposed to be made, well, how do you know? How do any of us know how films are supposed to be made? There is a different style for every single film. Each film calls for a different thing from its director. So although there is a truth to the idea that auteur directors have their own signature to a project, it usually comes down to where they are in their head at that time, what kind of world they're about to enter, what kind of atmosphere their film dictates to them, that they kind of absorb and take on, and not kind of imprint on their project. The second you try and imprint yourself as one singular human being onto a project, or a design by committee, loads of people, the second you try and imprint all of these different fighting philosophies onto a world which already has its own philosophy built into it, then you're probably going to fail in some regard, or you're not going to get the most out of, you're not going to get the richest content in your shots. You should really lean into all of the philosophies that are already there, rather than try and impart your own philosophy onto a certain location. Although, let's say we're making a film in this street, and we're making a film about workers, we're making a film about workers who live right there, and they live in New York, they live in this place, so the philosophies of the city will be imparted onto them. They will have you would have to live here for a little while to understand those philosophies. You can't just come in like me as a tourist and experience this for a week or two and then go about, you think you can make a film about it. But let's go back to these workers. So let's say that they work here, they all have their own internal kind of relationships and problems with each other and feelings about the world. That's dictated by the New York kind of state of mind, I guess. And I hated saying that. And they would all kind of go about their business with the idea of, let's say they were courier workers like I've done in the past, that they have a kind of lackluster view on the world because they have this kind of dead-end job, but it's still exciting enough to get them out on the streets and in danger from time to time. I remember when I was making that film, I watched a documentary on bike messengers in New York, and you were able to see the type of philosophy that they approached the world on, which is different from anyone else in New York. It was definitely different from, say, Taxi Driver, which has its own kind of philosophy. It's kind of interpreted, stolen from Letters from the Underground by which Paul Schrader took on board and kind of based it upon. But that's a different kind of style to this Courier documentary, which really influenced me in making my film, or working with my actors to kind of get them on board as couriers and get them to experience the world the way that I then saw it. Also working at my own kind of job at the time, I was experiencing some kind of different internal fights in the job. So you bring everything that you are into the film, and the more that you can bring from yourself in different ways, not just kind of these are events which happen, facts, but the kind of feelings about the world and the atmosphere, that sometimes it's down to the lighting and the atmosphere of the lighting, the textures of the kind of props of the world which make up the atmosphere again. The more that you bring this in, the better your film's going to be, the richer the content of a singular shot, because you are right on that frequency of your film. And that in itself is so different to any other film in the world and cannot be recreated. I was never afraid that someone was going to read my script and therefore steal my film, steal the film's whole idea, even at the very end before a shoot, because you were able to you could say, well, no one's going to make it like I'm going to make it, because I'm so tuned into that frequency and no one else would possibly be tuned into that frequency. You've got to be like that. Why aren't you? So there are certain core beliefs which people will try and fight you against. One of the biggest ones is how an actor works and how an actor prepares for a scene, and how basically you can work with actors who aren't open and honest with you and will tell you the truth about their entire life. I tend to prefer the people who are open and honest rather than try and hide behind a mask and hide behind a character. The more open and honest you are as a human being, the more that they're going to bring out of you, the less you're trying to put on as a front. So if you sit down with these actors and they're kind of closed off with you and you feel like you can't work with them, maybe you can work with them depending on the role. If all they have to be is, say, a father figure in the background, maybe that's appropriate that they're strict and closed off. Maybe that will work for you. It depends, whatever works. But usually you want to be working with people. If you're an open and honest person, you're probably going to want to work with open and honest people as well, which will bring the most out of them, the most out of you. They will even start complimenting you on this. They will say, I really like working with him as a director because he's open and honest, and therefore that means I feel like I can be open and honest with them. Or if you kind of employ your beliefs, the more kind of authentic you are to your beliefs in filmmaking, the more people will start to recognize that that's just how Peter works. That's how, today I'm working with Stanley Kubrick, that's how Stanley Kubrick works. Tomorrow I'm working with Alfred Hitchcock, that's how Alfred Hitchcock works, who, by the way, didn't really care about actors that much. So, these films have pretty decent performances, but it stands to reason that the performances that you see in those films are not the most important parts of those films. What's most important is suspense, his kind of, the comfort zone which he lives in, the strengths which he lived in. And also, I would say, to add to Alfred Hitchcock, I would say about his, use of locations, use of cinematic language, the experiments which he went on. All of this is really what he was interested in, and what he was interested in discovering throughout his films, what he knew his strengths were and what he could show people. What I'll say as well is that if you're worried about your films whilst you're making them, if you're worried that once you watch it back it's going to be boring, or you watch it back and you're worried that the acting's not good enough, or you're watching it back, and these are all standard worries as well. I have them all the time, and my friends have them, my colleagues have them. Basically, if you are worried about them, obviously you're going to try and do something about it. You're going to try and focus on the acting. If you believe that the acting was shit in your previous film, you're going to focus on sometimes time. If you're working with the edit, if you're worried about your shots not being if they're boring or not dynamic enough, you're going to want to focus on the editing to get the shot durations right, which can be pretty dangerous as well, because just because you're interrupting the process to throw some kind of forced idea onto the edit, which your editor's going to love, or if it's you're just going to go with. It's important to fire the writer once you're onto production, fire the director once you're onto editing. You're working with this found footage in the edit, you're not working with a plan that you already had. You have a new philosophy from each stage of the process, and you've got to kind of adapt to that new philosophy quickly and throw the old one out the window, perhaps, but still hold true to that original idea, which was the interest for making the film, whether it was the atmosphere of a certain idea inherently within that idea. So the truth is, most people don't even know what their philosophy is going to be, and that's probably a good thing right now, because obviously you're going to want to learn eventually and figure it out so that you can play to your strengths, but it does help to be so free that you can do just about anything. It may help you to learn about time as a sculpting in time concept, which it did with me, with the idea that silence and slow cinema can be king. That's how you get Breaking Bad. That's how you get Once Upon a Time in America, or Once Upon a Time in the West. That's how you get Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So basically, even a film like Chungking Express, which is supposedly so fast, or Wolf of Wall Street, which is supposedly so fast, or Mean Streets, you're still playing with time. And if you've got time as a concept, even if your film's fast, you're still thinking about it in every shot. It just tends to be that some of the time you choose longer shots because of it, and that's only beneficial because you get that second hit once you watch a shot for long enough. If you have a shot on that's for about, say, this video, the background starts to sink in after a while, and you start to as you drift off because of my boring fucking voice, you start to take in the background, you start to become more interested in that, and therefore that soaks into you, you're leaving something in soak, you're letting something bake into you. And that is the beauty of having static tripod shots, is that the philosophy of having longer takes, sculpting in time, by having silence and longer takes, or background ambience, atmosphere, begins to all soak into you, and that's why we do it. And the power of film shows itself through that. If you have a bunch of loads of cuts, like this is some kind of trailer video, you're not going to get a lot out of that. Even in trailers, they can slow down scenes sometimes so that you can experience the the actual atmosphere of the film. But of course, a 2-3 minute trailer, when have you got time to actually linger on a shot without actually showing the entire film? It makes you think about how different trailers can be made that can be just like teasers, and that's why they do that. I feel like the worst thing and the best thing you can do is take from someone else's philosophy. So a previous director, obviously, you look at me and all my kind of shots are inspired by Wong Kar-wai, Richard Linklater, and Martin Scorsese, and Andrei Tarkovsky, and there is, and I could go on for about 30 or 60 directors which have influenced me. The more that you watch, the more diverse your influences are going to be. But primarily, when we go back to Martin Scorsese, and we go back to that's my favorite director, really. So I'm always going to be influenced by him, by the kind of philosophy which he comes to film for. So really, it's always going to be a point that my films are always going to go in that direction, and that they're always going to feel a little bit like a British Scorsese film. But then again, his films are always going to feel just a tiny bit like an Alfred Hitchcock film or an Elia Kazan film.